Are we doomed to never-ending high house prices? Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian here and welcome to another episode of HeiseSays. Grab your hashtag not sponsored cheap coffee and I want to talk about, well, there's an article mentioning one of the taxation issues here in Australia and many parts of the world that one could argue is playing a role in why we have such expensive housing here in our wonderful country. Now, there's one part of home ownership here that we need to consider. Well, mobility. The ability for people to move from one place to another, either for a job or if they want to sell one house, maybe to move to another part of the country for a nicer climate. It's part of the reason why my family moved to Queensland from cold Victoria. Beautiful climate. I'm looking out my window here. It's a wonderful sunny day, nice breeze coming in. It's great in Queensland. But there's a little tax we have to pay every time that happens. You know, every time you sell and buy, sell and buy, sell and buy, the government has their hand in their pocket, taking a little piece of it every time. And these taxes are often disincentivizing older Aussies from downsizing. So my mother, she had a 3-bedroom house with a pool. After my father passed, she didn't need all of that. She didn't need to maintain all of that. So she got downsized to a smaller house in in a complex. So they've got a shared pool, a shared barbecue, all the gardens are maintained. She doesn't have to worry about that, and, well, her grandchildren are taking advantage of it, probably on a beautiful day like today. And, well, she could reap some of the financial benefit of the asset that her and her husband had bought and the capital growth that had over time. And a family with children bought that house and moved into it. And they could have the memories of swimming in the pool there and enjoying the backyard. That's what you want. You don't want to be locked in, or you don't necessarily want to be locked in the same house your whole life. You want people who are reaching, my mother might watch this, so I better be careful. People who are reaching the golden years of their life, or, well, empty nesters. That's when the kids are out and you've got all this floor in you, and you're probably too old and don't need to rent out the other room, so what's the point in keeping it? So you sell it, or your only reason to keep it would be to pass it on to your children. But these taxes are stopping that flexibility, and that's an issue. So let's have a look at this article and a few other things. So, a Reserve Bank governor takes aim at tax barriers to economic mobility. An age-old tax keeping empty nesters in huge homes while young families squeeze into apartments has drawn renewed ire from frequent critics. Successive Reserve Bank governors have criticized stamp duty, the tax paid on property purchases. So let's look at here. I asked ChatGPT to, what's the origin of stamp duty here in Australia? So, originated in England in 1694 as a tax on legal documents and was later adopted across the British Empire. I remember when I helped my mother with selling and buying her new place, that what are you getting for the stamp duty? You're paying a shitload of money for a stamp or a bunch of paperwork. It's just another way the government can tax you. We inherited stamp duty during colonial times as part of British fiscal policy. New South Wales was the first colony to introduce stamp duty in 1865. So wait. Oh boy. Queensland and Victoria followed in 1866, with Queensland colonial treasurer famously calling it a magnificent mode of extracting money. I don't think many things have changed. Back then they probably would get to, the quiet part was said aloud. Stamp duty was applied to a wide range of documents, including property transfers, wills, and business agreements. So after 1901, taxation powers were divided between the Commonwealth and states. The stamp duty remained a state tax, with each state developing its own legislation and rates. Now, remember, wasn't stamp duty meant to be abolished when we brought in the GST? Because now you're already paying 10% on all the services and trades you use to build your building, your house, and as well as the construction of it. So, but government wants their slice every time it moves around, doesn't it? Every time it changes hands. New South Wales replaced its Stamp Duties Act of 1920 with the Duties Act of 97. Queensland, okay, we'll see. Other states followed with aiming to simplify and modernise stamp duty laws. Stamp duty is now primarily levied on property transactions, but also applies to business assets, motor vehicles, and insurance in some states. It is a major source of revenue for state governments funding infrastructure and public services. Economists and policymakers have criticised stamp duty for being ineffective and a barrier to housing mobility. Now, this is a topic that has been discussed over and over again. And has any... What's the best they can do at it? They throw money or they exempt first home buyers from it, but that's not going to help force or encourage the elderly to downsize. Okay, so you get rid of it for first home buyers, you get rid of it for the elderly, then the only people that are stuck with it are those of us that are in the middle part of our lives with all the kids, families, schooling costs, dancing lessons, swimming lessons, all of these expenses. So then we exempt a family because they've got it tough. Then you've only got the single middle-aged Australians paying and carrying the country on their back. So let's have a look at some other countries that have it, because we're not the only ones, sadly. So it was introduced in 65 in New South Wales, 3 to 5.5%, and I asked for the impact and the home ownership rates here so we could compare it. So reduces mobility and calls for reform to land tax. So 66.3% is the home ownership rate here in Australia. Now that's gone down. That has gone down. Our home ownership rate wasn't where it was. The UK, 0 to 12, higher rates dampen transactions used to cool the markets at 63%. I mean, that's another thing. If you can intentionally use it to slow down these transactions. United States, earliest 20th century at a state level, 0 to 4%. They vary and it impacts affordability. But notice that US has lower home ownership than Australia. And I mean, the US is funny because here as an Australian, we can, or even as a Canadian watching or Kiwi, you can see the house prices for these beautiful houses. And when you look at the cost of it compared to over here, it just seems insane. But you've also got to think where these houses are located. Are there jobs and opportunities there? Do you want to live there? Or is there a huge land tax hidden there with the property, a huge other burden that you have to pay? Singapore, up to 30% for foreigners. It's used to cool speculative demand, high for non-residents. Look at the home ownership rate there, 87.9%. That's crazy. I didn't realize Singapore had such high home ownership. That's interesting. France, 2 to 12%, affects affordability and investor interest, 64.7% again. Hong Kong, up to 15% for non-residents, suppresses speculative buying, and you've got a 22.1% home ownership there. Now that's interesting. I wonder if I need to look at the historical context of that. If it's just fallen since Hong Kong was handed over, or you've got such a culture of renting there. I remember when I was in Hong Kong, rents were very expensive, and what you got was tiny, really small. But then again, this is coming as an Australian going there for a holiday. So Italy, 2 to 9%. Low for residents, higher for second homes, 73.7%. They're beating us in home ownership too. Let's see that. I mean, there you go. I mean, maybe you don't need it. We need to just remove stamp duty for your first home. If you own one home, you don't pay any stamp duty and only make it for multiple homes. Then the government can still get their money, and it's making it easier for people who want to buy a home to live in. Why are we... I would argue as a civilization and as a people, we should make it a primary aim to facilitate home ownership and stability for the majority of our population, for as many people as possible. I would argue it's not the state's role to provide the housing. I would argue it's the state's role to step away and allow people to use their skills, resources, and capabilities to get a home. Because right now they seem to constantly be getting in the way, making it harder and harder and harder. And the fear is you have a younger generation that are going to call for more government intervention to make it easier, to change the rules. And it's going to backfire. It always backfires. We'll see it again. Portugal, 0.8%. Yeah, it's tiny. Look how high their home ownership is. Spain, 1.5. Yep, 76. Japan, 3 plus 60,000 plus consumption tax adds cost burden to buyers. Whoa. Why is Japan only at 55% home ownership rate? Is there not a culture of owning homes there? For those of you that are in Japan, let me know. That's interesting. I mean, you can get some bargains in Japan, but then you've got the culture shock of moving there. Japan's got a lot of problems, particularly with their population growth. They've got some challenges to deal with. And their work culture is terrible too. I remember I had a mate. He came and studied here and lived in Australia. And he'd spent a few years traveling around the world. He had culture shock moving back to Japan. So Thailand, 0.1%. Minimal impact shared by the buyer and seller. But they've got, look at that, 80% home ownership there. And Dubai, so 4%, 2% buyer, 2% seller. Transaction cost, no annual property tax, 28% ownership. You've got a low home ownership there. Interesting. So there we go, guys. So yeah, I mean, we're not the worst with regards to home ownership, but we're getting beaten by a lot of countries. And these taxes are making an impact. So let's go back to this article and keep going. My predecessor called it a tax on mobility, Michelle Bullock said on Friday. It's also a barrier to people moving to find jobs, a barrier for dynamism in the economy. It basically keeps people pretty much where they are instead of allowing them to up and move. Maybe that's the intention there. You want stability. You want your nice, well-behaved populace locked in the same space. We don't want that. You want people to move. Australia's average household size has been on a long-term decline, accelerating during the pandemic. So the same housing stock provides housing for less people because there's less people in each house, Ms. Bullock told a News Corp Business Forum. She suggested stamp duty could be discouraging people from downsizing into apartments. That could be it, but also the shit quality of a lot of apartments. That could also be it. And then you've got to deal with a body corporate and a bunch of idiots you've got to live with. I still remember we worked on a body corporate job, a gymnasium we put in there. And the politics in the body corporate, I couldn't believe it. I was shocked. I really was shocked. But weaning the states off stamp duty, first levied 160 years ago, which can provide up to a quarter of their annual income, has proven difficult. Economists recommended a land tax model, which all landowners paid an annual fee rather than a one-off payment when taking ownership. Okay, let's do that. And then how about all these native title claimants that have won? We'll make them pay a land tax too. Good luck with that. So the government will end up paying tax to itself. New South Wales Premier Chris Minns fought to exempt stamp duty on his way into office, scrapping a short-lived option for first-home buyers to pay land tax instead. Mr. Minns labelled the other option a permanent tax on the family home, instead raising the eligibility threshold for stamp duty concessions. His government on Friday rebutted Ms. Bullock's attack, saying waivers and reductions had saved more than... Yeah, no, she's not talking about first-home buyers. Okay, sure, 73,000 had saved 20 grand. That's not the point. It's not about responding with a one-off jab for political brownie points. It's talking about a systematic long-term issue in which you have a significant portion of our population unable or unwilling to move for fear of the tax burden. You're restricting people from adapting to new opportunities. You're creating disincentives for mobility. I mean, this is Australia. We're the country of disincentives. We're a country with 4 banks, bloody much, a bunch of mortgage. We dig stuff up out of the ground, and we might have a country attached to it somewhere. You know, the nation of disincentives. That's kind of sad. Mr. Minns had taken the stage before Ms. Bullock at the event on Friday, telling the room he was praying for a future further interest rate cut. Why? I mean, the cash rate is at the level where it's normally meant to be. Let's bring that up here. Come on. There you go. Look at the chart. Look at the history of that chart. Going from about 2010, you see that sharp fall down. That's post-GFC. That's all artificial. Does he want us to constantly be in that position? What would happen to house prices now if they go up? Oh boy, we all know. We know. Okay, don't sit there thinking we're going to see a crash, guys. I know everyone's there is hoping for it. They're thinking it's a bubble. It might be for the little colony here, but remember, we're on the edge of a global economy. We need to start pricing our housing in US dollars to get a perspective of what it's actually worth. Data this week showed Sydney's median house price hit 1.75 million. Okay, let's do that. Hang on, let me open up my Edge. 1.75 USD to AUD. What? Oh, 1.75. Hang on. AUD to USD. There we go. I got it right. Okay. So it's $1,014 US dollars. 1.14 million US dollars. So still over $1 million bucks. Still pretty expensive. Still pretty expensive. But there you go. So Sydney house is what, 1.1 million now. The median unit price, okay. You know what's that? 840,000. Or did I do 8.4 million? I did. Okay, so we're looking at 550,000 US dollars. There you have it for a unit in Sydney. For most people, their first home will be an apartment building, Mr. Min said. We need to build more of them. Okay, see, this is called providing more apartments. But an apartment, you've got to deal with the risks involved in owning an apartment. Now, you've got a level of construction complexity that is significantly higher than a standard residential house. You know, maximum, what are people going, 3 stories? Over 1 is rare. You've got a construction technique that people have done again and again and again and again and again. Sure, you might have issues. It could be maybe foundation issues. That could be with the land development. But generally, if you've got water leaking or things there, you can fix it. It's not going to be the end of the world. Whereas if a high-rise has some incredible structural defects, we've seen time and time again where they've had to look at demolishing the entire building. And then you've got a whole bunch of other idiots you've got to live with, to coordinate with, to make sure it's maintained properly, so you don't damage the property and then, oh, okay, it's worthless. Or you've got builders who'll set up shell companies, and then, they'll get out of their defects by just destroying that company that owns nothing. So do we want to encourage people to live like that? I can see why people would rather live in a shittier house with your own block of land than having to deal with all of that. Or maybe I've just looked at too many cases of these things going to disaster. Because, houses aren't perfect. They're not going to be. But then it's all on you. You're not in bed with a bunch of strangers. There's little socialist towers where they have dictates on what you can do, when you can go to the pool, when you can wipe your ass. The number of new home dwellings completions in the most expensive city in Australia and the second most expensive in the world has not been anywhere near good enough. Well, okay, mate. You're a politician. Queensland and Victoria has been outpacing New South Wales in building new dwellings for years. But recent reforms have focused on high-density development and planning reforms to get homes built faster. I think we need the missing middle. I think we need to look at townhouses. We need to look at attached houses. The Premier is confident the state can do it with a little bit of help from Michelle. Ms. Bullock acknowledged interest rates have an impact despite house prices not being part of the central bank's mandate. The best thing I think we can do is to keep inflation low and stable, because that keeps building costs and so not out of That keeps building costs down, I'm saying. As interest rate cuts come down, hopefully you'll see is people will be able to afford to build more houses. Well, yeah. Let's have a bit of a reflection and a chat on this one, guys. This is sadly, it seems like an age-old argument for over 150 years now. All of these taxes are adding to the cost of construction. It's just that simple. Now we're adding to the cost of people moving houses, selling and downsizing. We really need to take a step back and make the argument that we need to reduce the government burden on our citizens here. Are all these wonderful services that you get from the government, are they really worth you not being able to afford a house? Are the wages that our civil servants paid, the significant pay rises they're pushing for. Do you think that's appropriate? Or would you rather be able to afford a house? Do you think there's a chance that the states are going to give up their nice fat chunk of stamp duty and housing will become more affordable thanks to that? Or will they do every trick they can imagine to kick the can down the road? Just keep status quo. Find a way to get first-home buyers in. There'll be more and more sacrifices people will have to make. We're now at an age where both mother and father, or both partners in a couple, have to work. It's not a luxury, it's a requirement. So, I mean, my money's on the Reserve Bank government. No, she's right. What do you think? Anyway, take care. See you next time. Bye for now.